aluminum sheet imports. We know that this could have a significant impact on the marine industry and your business operation. I am going to be joined today by the law firm Mowry & Grimson. We have Kristen Mowry and Jeff Grimson, who have been retained as counsel for the initial phase of this investigation that we'll be talking to you a little bit about today. Both Kristen and Jeff are specialists in unfair trade cases. They deal with import compliance matters affecting U.S. end users and manufacturers, and so we're really happy to have their expertise today and in the work that we are doing. For those of you on the call, this will be recorded, and so if you have other employees or colleagues that want to hear a little bit more about this issue, this PowerPoint as well as the recording will be made available after today's webinar. So getting started, I wanted to lay a little bit of groundwork about what we're talking about in the law which governs this investigation. It takes us back to the Tariff Act of 1930, which allows for the investigation by the U.S. Department of Commerce and the International Trade Commission to assess unfair trade practices. By this law, there are two criteria that both DOC and the ITC can look at. They're looking at, is this import being sold at less than fair value? And does the import benefit from illegal foreign government subsidies? So ITC will examine whether the imports have a negative impact on the domestic industry, and what we have seen from previous cases, this can lead to significantly steep duties as well as market disruption. If you're just now hearing about it, it's because things have been moving very rapidly. This all started back on November 28th when Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross initiated an unfair trade investigation. We're talking specifically here about common alloy aluminum sheet from China. There have been other investigations in the news with aluminum foil and some other raw products, but this here is our focus today, is the common alloy aluminum sheet. Now, this has been a little bit of an unprecedented move. Self-initiation by the Department of Commerce means that it wasn't started as it typically is. Usually a domestic industry files a complaint, the Department of Commerce takes that under consideration, decides whether to move forward with it or not. The last self-initiated case was almost 30 years ago, and so it did catch a lot of people by surprise. It has a lot of concerns for our industry and others about the fairness of the whole process, and definitely, as you see in the timetable there, happening right in the middle of the holiday season, had a lot of people scrambling. What I want to do now is turn it over to our attorneys, Jeff and Kristen, to talk a little bit about the departments involved and some of the parameters in this type of investigation specifically. So Kristen and Jeff, on to you.
Perfect. First of all, just checking that you can hear me okay, Nicole?
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. Thanks so much. Good morning, everybody. We're very pleased to address the association on this very important matter. I'm going to advance to the next slide and talk for a few moments about what these agencies are. First, we have the International Trade Commission that is on the screen in front of you. This is something of a court, but it is a quasi-judicial commission. It is not a member of the executive branch, it's not a member of the legislative branch, and it's not a member of the judicial branch, so it's in the middle. It's a hybrid entity staffed by commissioners who are appointed for 9-year terms, and there are 6 of them. They are supposed to be from not more than 3 from any one political party. Currently, there are only 4 commissions. There are 2 openings that are unfilled vacancies. The ITC's mandate is to look inward in the United States and look at the condition of the domestic industry and decide whether imports from the targeted country or countries are a cause of material injury now or a threat of future injury in the future. And as it says on the slide, it's an up or down vote. the ITC will vote yes or no. Next slide, please. The Department of Commerce looks at the foreign country that is targeted by the case. They are an executive branch agency. The Secretary of Commerce is Wilbur Ross. He is very interested in the anti-dumping and countervailing duty laws and in general trade matters involving imports from China. So I would say at this point in time, to contrast it in one important way, the Department of Commerce is a political body within the executive branch, and the ITC, the International Trade Commission, is not within that political structure. The Commerce Department will look at, in this case, China, and look principally for two things. Are the Chinese selling to the U.S. at low prices, either because they are dumping or they are benefiting from unlawful government subsidies, or both? And the Commerce Department, or DOC, will do those two analyses separately in independent investigations. And at the end, they will tell the Customs and Border Protection to begin collecting estimated duties, and they will change those duty rates a few times during that process. Next slide. Okay. So without giving everybody too long of a session here, we'll just quickly say what is dumping and what is countervailing duty. Dumping has been around for 100 years, the concept, as well as countervailing duty, and it is a violation of international and U.S. law if a foreign producer and exporter is selling to the U.S. at a price that is less than fair value. And in the case of China, they will construct a value that China's prices should be based on replacing their costs with costs from some other market economy country. There is a special calculation methodology that applies to China because it's a non-market economy. Countervailing duty is illegal government subsidies. These can be either direct payments that depend on exports, or more indirect situations where the government subsidizes some upstream input, or electricity, or land, or other things such as are mentioned here, grants, loans. And those countervailing duties are applied in addition to the anti-dumping duties by the Commerce Department in two separate parallel investigations. Nicole mentioned briefly that these things have moved quickly. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. This is typical of an anti-dumping countervailing duty case. What is atypical is that it was essentially started by the United States government itself. But the timeline here is fast, but it is also this way in most anti-dumping countervailing duty cases. So as Nicole mentioned, November 28th, the Commerce Department announced the self-initiation of an anti-dumping and countervailing duty case. Most of the time, they will, the first indication of trade problems of this nature is triggered by the filing of a petition by a domestic industry, private companies who come to the government for help in launching one of these. But here, the initial phase of whether or not to initiate was all done behind closed doors, and out popped a case on November 28th, with a hearing on December the 21st, right in the week before the holiday break. NMMA moved quickly to take action. We were in contact with them very early on, entered into an engagement to represent the NMMA as well as at the last minute gaining the support from the RVIA, and that is also an effort that Nicole and the association folks are continuing to this day. The hearing occurred on December 21st. That was an initial hearing before the ITC, the International Trade Commission. The legal standard at this phase of the case is pretty low, but the purpose of the preliminary phase and that hearing is to decide whether the case should be continued to a full investigation. Folks from the NMMA testified at that hearing, and on the December 27th, right after the holiday, submitted a legal brief on the record. The ITC voted in January. That says the 12th up there. So we just got that vote, and as you'll see in a later slide, the case will proceed as expected. So at the hearing, what we focused on was the impact of this case on the aluminum boating sector. If I could have the next slide. And we emphasized that aluminum sheet is the chief raw material for pontoon boats. It's used in many engines, various components of marine products and trailers. And we emphasized to the ITC that this is a very important part of the boat building sector. The association's data indicates that this part of the boating sector is a $3 billion a year industry, so it's quite large, with 8,000 direct jobs, people actually manufacturing these items using the aluminum as a raw material. And you see some of the other stats on there as well. So among power boats, aluminum power boats are a major segment with 43% of the market. Pontoon boats, also very important growing segment, and not to mention trailers with contribution to the economy of $351 million in just sales, not to mention indirect contributions. So with that framed for the commission, we argued that they should make a negative determination to terminate the case. And I should have said before that if the ITC votes that the case should not proceed, they have the power to terminate it either now at the preliminary phase, which we know that they did not do, or at the final phase. And they have that power regardless of what duties the Commerce Department calculates. So when we went before the commission, we wanted them to be sensitive and fully aware of the collateral damage that this case could have on the boating sector. And we argued that this industry, domestic industry, is not injured by imports of Chinese aluminum. And we suggested to the commission if they were injured, they would have brought a petition, but they did not. They relied on commerce to spark the case on its own. We argued that there's no replacement of domestic orders by Chinese raw material, and that the prices of imports don't have any apparent relationship with U.S. aluminum sheet pricing. And we pointed to foreign sources that are ready and able to fill in if the Chinese were to be blocked from the market. Of course, that would usually take some time, and sometimes it's not a perfect replacement. But the point there being that if duties are imposed, it's going to create some hardship, but ultimately will not necessarily lead to any benefit to the domestic producers. And one major point that we emphasize specific to the marine industry is that the wider dimensional aluminum sheets, 72 inches and greater, are in short supply among the domestic industry producers. And some of that has to do with the automotive sector taking more larger aluminum sheets now, especially in the light trucks, pickup truck segment, and taking supply away from what had been previously available to the boating sector. And the last point there, as you can read, it's just that the mills are operating at good capacity utilization, which is another sign that the industry is really not suffering by reason of this of this imported product. Next slide. So whether or not you or your company or your customers, or I'm not sure the makeup of all on the call, but one thing that we usually see in these cases is that regardless of where you're buying aluminum sheet from, these cases tend to disrupt the market and raise costs for aluminum sheet from all sources. And that is simply a supply and demand phenomenon where the supply is interrupted and doesn't reach equilibrium in the near term and takes some more time. That all raises costs. That is the reason why the domestic industry supports this case, even though they didn't file it themselves. Timing-wise, we could see actual duties kicking in on imported product from China as early as February 1st. That is on the early side, but the risk window begins then. And what could those duties look like? Well, normally petitioners allege a duty rate in the petition when they bring it to the Commerce Department, and then the Commerce Department reviews it to see if the allegation has any merit whatsoever. Here, since Commerce initiated the case itself, of course, the duty rates that are in the petition are presumed to be reasonable, and what Commerce is saying is they're seeing unfair trading, at least in the anti-dumping side of it around 60%, and that number is probably on the low side in terms of a typical case against a steel product from China. Next slide. So as we said to the ITC, and we will be saying in all the industry outreach, that this case is going to harm more U.S. jobs than it helps. And mentioned already that direct jobs for marine manufacturing of 8,000. The NMMA's data indicates another 12,000 jobs in related industries, dealer jobs of at least 10,000, touching product that consumes this raw material. And when you start going beyond that to RV trailer, other supporting industries, you are in the tens of thousands of jobs who could be negatively affected by this case. So what about on the other side? The domestic aluminum sheet makers testified at the hearing that their actual jobs in the production of this product, so limited to this product, are 3,700. You will see in their press releases that they give other much higher numbers, but those are numbers that relate to the aluminum sector as a whole. So as we emphasized to the ITC, and will do so as we move forward, that Commerce, by self-initiating this case, not even acting on the complaint of an industry, is proactively choosing one group of American workers over another group, and in our case, a much larger group. Next slide. As I mentioned before, we lost already the very first phase by a 4-0 vote. Quite typical of cases at this preliminary stage, but we still get a lot by participating in the preliminary stage in terms of laying the groundwork for potential success down the road. So the ITC did vote, and then this case will continue now to a full investigation. In terms of what that means, our next slide will show we've got the two columns here. The white column kind of in the middle says CVD timeline, that's countervailing duty timeline. And then the far right column is the anti-dumping timeline. You see the dates of the vote on there, January 12th, and then, as mentioned earlier, the first duties could be kicking in as soon as February 1st. That would be the countervailing duty, the subsidy case. Those tend to move faster than the anti-dumping cases. So countervailing duty could come onto imports as early as February 1st. and then the anti-dumping duty would follow 2.5 months later on April the 20th. Those deadlines can all be extended, but this is what folks in the industry should be thinking about as the soonest this case could hit, if it's not hitting already in terms of the market dynamics. Under this schedule, things would be wrapping up by the end of August, but actually we're probably looking at 3-4 months later if Commerce takes its normal extensions. Okay, next slide. So in terms of stages, we're past the very first stage. The ITCR has already voted. The case is not terminated. It's going forward. And then we get into the Commerce Department phase, which was on the last slide, where Commerce will set duty levels of both anti-dumping and then countervailing duty, and they will have preliminary rates and they will have final rates at the end of the case. When the case comes back to the case will come back to the ITC for a final decision on whether it should remain in place or not. And at that point, the ITC will engage in a much longer, more in-depth analysis of the data, and the odds of defeating an anti-dumping countervailing duty case go up significantly in the final phase before the International Trade Commission compared to the preliminary phase, which is really quite hard to have a case terminated. Next slide. So where do we go from here? This is a very disruptive, can be a very disruptive event. These kinds of cases, they can last for years and years, if not decades, looking at some past cases. So we really need and are asking for the support of all the companies who are affected by this case to be working together with the association to understand what are the issues, what is the impact on your industry, what is your company's liability for duties from the Customs and Border Protection. As we prepare to go forward at the ITC final hearing, things that would be very interesting to know about would be the domestic industry's inability to supply volumes or the required specifications, and there we're thinking of the width again, and whether there's potential substitutes from other countries that either are or are not able to fill in for the Chinese raw material if it is burdened by some high duties. Those are going to be the things that we'll want to see how they play out factually, and depending on how those arguments, or those facts come in, we'll assess what may be the strongest arguments at the ITC. But if we don't know how the case is affecting you, we are limited in the arguments that we can make. This is your business. You are in the best place to tell the association and us about how it's affecting you, and that's what we really are looking for is contact. The next slide it discusses some of the other outreach efforts that are planned through the association. Nicole, I think, did you want to say some more about this slide?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, happy to take over. Hopefully this gave you a little bit more context and background into the investigation itself and what we've been doing already by retaining Jeff and Kristen as well from the firm. But we need your help. A lot of you have already been in contact with us over the holidays. We had some great discussions about the potential impact. And as Jeff just said, we need to hear more of those stories. That helps to build our case and the message that we relay both to the administration, to the ITC, and obviously to Capitol Hill. For those of you that have not heard of it before, Boating United is our grassroots platform. That gives us the ability for you to reach your member of Congress directly via that website. And we have an action alert that's going out this afternoon. What we want to do is really start getting the attention of members of Congress. Though, as Jeff has explained, the decision making is made within the Department of Commerce and the ITC. We believe that members of Congress need to hear from you. They need to know about the potential disruptions in your supply chain, the impact of significant duties on the overall cost of production. They need to hear from other American manufacturers on the potential impact of jobs and the consumer product. And so you will be receiving an email from Voting United. I really urge you to take action. It's very simple. It'll take you less than 5 minutes. Share it with your friends, share it with your employees to make sure that we start getting the word out. We're also going to be engaging in a full-fledged public relations campaign. We've already had some great success this past week with op-eds, but we're going to be doing a little bit more. We need to make sure that our side of the story is being heard. We know that the U.S. aluminum industry is actively out there telling their side of the story and talking about the U.S. jobs that are being impacted. And so they need to hear from us. It's so important that you offer your industry, your company's perspective. Those stories, those op-eds, letters to the editor, using social media channels really helps to bolster our campaign and our message, and we think really gives us strong footing as we go to the Department of Commerce to talk about our issues. I also would encourage you to join us here in DC. We know that your time is very important and that DC is oftentimes a very long way away from your business and your normal daily operations, but having you in town, being able to go up to Capitol Hill and have meetings with the administration and talk about this case could make the difference in whether voting is going to be as impacted as we fear it will be, or if we'll be able to get a little bit of a reprieve. So we are scrambling right now, as you can see from all these slides, that it has been a relatively short timeline. And so what we're hoping is the first week of March to invite you, if you are interested and have the time, to come to DC. We will set up meetings for you and go to Capitol Hill and talk to the administration directly about our side of the story. If you're unable to make it in March, then we hope that you'll consider joining us in May for the American Voting Congress. As many of you know, that is our annual fly-in where we bring in members of Congress, we talk to administration officials, go up to Capitol Hill, and seeing the timeline that Jeff posed for us today, those are going to be critical decision points, March and May, for the next phases of this investigation. So lending your voice and your time to come to DC will be impactful. If you have any questions and follow-up, I encourage you to reach out to me. We have formed a committee. We are looking to have more of those stories, as mentioned before, of how this has the potential to impact your business. If you have the ability and are willing to lend your voice to our communications efforts, or to come to DC the first week of March, or during the American Voting Congress, which is May 9th through the 11th, let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions and obviously feed some of your more specialized concerns to Jeff and the firm so that we can move forward with our work. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
Okay, looks like I have a couple questions here, Nicole. How do I contact a member of Congress about this case?
So you will receive this afternoon an alert from Voting United. We'll also be posting it through Currents. It'll be on social media. You click on the alert, you put in your name and your address, and it will automatically go to the member of Congress which represents your district. So it's really just a few clicks of personal information so that we know that it's getting to the right member, and that will be delivered directly to their office, both your representative as well as your senator.
Okay, the next question. Is there any potential damage to fiberglass boat builders on aluminum parts?
I'll go ahead and take that. So that depends on how much you're using. Obviously, we know that there's a big segment of the fiberglass, but we know that fiberglass boats are being trailered by aluminum trailers. We know that there are some component parts like fuel tanks that also source this aluminum. And so that's where we see a lot of downstream impact, even for those that don't build primarily from aluminum raw material.
Okay, the next question. Are there other manufacturing industries impacted by the issue, and how are they engaging?
Yes, so Jeff mentioned this before, but we are working very closely with RVIA, that's the Recreational Vehicle Industry Association. RVs definitely have a significant impact here from sourcing aluminum materials. We're working within NMMA, the boat trailer manufacturers. We know that they have a significant source of this aluminum for their needs, as well as the National Trailer Association. And I have also been doing outreach to other organizations here in DC, Signs Association. So looking for other like-minded associations and industries that source this type of aluminum. And I can say across the board, there's a lot of concern. The rapidly moving time frame has caught everybody a little bit off guard, but we are working with a broad coalition of stakeholders and trying to use our resources collectively.
Okay, the next question. Is this going to impact the cost of aluminum coil?
I'll start, and Jeff, if you want to ask. So this specific investigation is for aluminum sheet that is 1, 3, and 5 times. That's what the parameters of this specific investigation. So if that's the type of aluminum that you are using for your production, then yes, that's what would be impacted.
Yeah, Nicole, I'll add on to that. So those are the alloy series. In terms of the dimensions directly covered by this case, it is aluminum, flat rolled aluminum, greater than 0.2 millimeters and up to 6.3 millimeters. So if you're consuming coil within that dimensional range, 0.2 up to 6.3, 0.2 is really where aluminum foil starts, so that's very thin. But 6.3 is up to the normal thickness of sheet stock. That's the dimensions covered by the case in terms of thickness. There's no width parameters or limitations. This case covers slit coil, coil cut to length, or coil of any width whatsoever. Only the thickness is constrained by the scope.
Okay. The next question. Has NMMA discussed or partnered with the United States Super Yacht Association as well as commercial builders in presenting its case? With regard to commercial builders, this can have an adverse impact on construction of vessels in accordance with the Jones Act.
So we've been doing outreach to all of our stakeholder partners. We're closely with USSA and others. As I've said before, this has been a fast-moving case. That's why we wanted to bring as many partners on today's webinar as possible. We know, obviously, our main arguments have been focused around the recreational use, but we know that many of our manufacturers and partners do have commercial applications, and so we will be focused on that. I will say, in terms of the Jones Act, there is another investigation that has to do, it's called the Section 232 investigation, that has to do with national security implications for aluminum imports. What we have been focused on is what Jeff talked about today, and that's the anti-dumping and countervailing duties. They are two separate investigations, and so even the administration has acknowledged that and kept them separately. And so we're focusing on the anti-dumping and countervailing, not on the national security side of this.
Okay. Are the tariffs going to be initiated April 1st, 2018, regardless of what happens?
Jeff, I'll let you take that.
Yep. Okay. So the April 1st deadline was coming from the anti-dumping side of the case. Really, on the countervailing duty side, we could see duties coming in even earlier than that. So the question really is there any chance that the Commerce Department would impose no duties, and realistically, there is no chance of that. And it is simply a fact that when you are dealing with China, there is a presumption of government control over Chinese exporters unless they come forward to argue that they are entitled to a separate rate from the countrywide rate. And not everybody will do that. There will always be some companies that don't answer the Commerce Department questionnaires or never even realize that they have a questionnaire to file. And so there is going to be a countervailing duty on China and an anti-dumping duty on China. The question is at what level. But I don't think that there's any realistic possibility that Commerce will not impose some level of duties on those dates, whether they are the accelerated February and April dates we mentioned in the slide, or whether it's on the more common schedule, which would be in April for the countervailing duty and June for the anti-dumping duty. By the way, that's the reason for the timing of the visit request that Nicole mentioned, because we are expecting that if the case follows that timeline, then those would be great periods for interested folks to come to DC and check in with your representatives. But short answer, no, there's no chance that there will be zero duties imposed in either countervailing or anti-dumping. That's the way the system works.
Okay, next question is, does NMMA have a boat trailer subgroup of manufacturers that is working on this issue?
Yes, so we have the boat trailer manufacturers division. They have been made aware of this, as have all NMMA members. We've been doing a lot of communications, and so we are working with them as well as the National Trailer Organization on this issue.
Okay, the next question. They said that Jeff mentioned that this issue has the potential to be a very disruptive event. Does this issue have potential to derail industry growth significantly, and could it be considered a black swan type of event?
So, I mean, that kind of forward-looking statement is really difficult to project right now. In our experience, duty rates that are high affect supply, and it do affect manufacturing, but that industries do find a way to cope, and equilibrium does restore to the market. I think personally, black swan is way too much of a characterization. But why should the government be hurting one industry that's large to potentially benefit another industry that's small? That's really our main point here.
Okay, looks like we have another question coming through. How many aluminum suppliers are in the USA?
I will say that at the hearing, there was quite a few who showed up at the conference. Specifically, we had Alaris, Constellium, Jupiter, JW, and Novelis. Some of those are also companies involved in the aluminum foil case. That exact number is something that we have in the confidential record that we as the lawyers get to see, but I think for this call I'll just stick with those names. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 showed up at the hearing.
Okay. Does this affect extruded aluminum tubing and moldings used in the RV industry?
Okay, in terms of direct effect, like will there be duties on aluminum tubing because of this case? I think the answer is no, but would it affect the supply and cost of those items or any item that's made from aluminum sheet that we anticipate? Yes, there would be an effect.
Okay. That appears to be the conclusion of the questions that have come in.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you, Jeff, for your time on today's call. We appreciate that so many of you joined us. We will be continuing to do communications to update you on the status of these investigations and the work that NMMA is doing on your behalf. I urge you, if you have any questions, please follow up with me directly. You see my contact information on the screen now. We will make sure to get those answers to you as quickly as possible. And again, if you have the time, please let me know, because we are going to be pulling together members to come to DC that first week of March, and hope that as many of you as possible can join us during the American Voting Conference on May 9th, so that we can take this issue to the administration and the Hill. So thank you all for your time today. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this was recorded. We will be posting the slides as well as this for you to share with any other interested colleagues. So thanks, and have a nice afternoon.